This is how fighting racism made me ugly. I have to tell you this story first. So back in 2021/2020, when the whole Asian hate thing was happening and we were in the middle of COVID-19, I applied for an apartment with a large real estate developer, and I'm finding out now that they made it incredibly hard for me to apply for this apartment. And I was just wondering why. I ended up being approved. I signed the lease after I basically hunted them down. And then a week goes by and I found out that they had actually given the apartment away to a white man. And that his experience, it seems, went incredibly smoothly. He saw the apartment and signed the lease and did everything and closed in one day. And for me, it took 3 weeks for me to actually get an answer from these leasing people and to get approved. And there was just so much back and forth, and then me being ignored at that time, and it almost seemed like they were trying to prevent me or they were scared of me. And listen, it was COVID. No one really knew what was happening. I'm Korean, but I could be Chinese in some people's eyes, and I might very well, part of me might be, I don't know, I have to take an ancestry test or something. But the point being, I think there was a lot of fear, and the apartment complex that I was applying to there were no Asian people. There were none. There were none. I had scheduled an appointment. I went to tour the apartment. No one showed up. They gave me a code to open to contact the leasing office, and then also to open the door just in case of emergency, in case no one showed up. I used the code. It didn't work. I tried calling the management office, the leasing office, anyone I could possibly find. I even tried texting a number that I found online, and I couldn't get in contact with them. It was just an incredibly weird, bizarre, difficult process to begin with. I don't want to say that I understand totally where they were coming from, if it in fact was stemming from Asian hate of any sort. I just don't know what else I'm supposed to believe, especially after hearing other people's experience of them. Specifically relating to Asian hate and bias and racism and discrimination in general. So I filed a complaint with the Human Rights Department of New York City, as well as Fair Housing and the Housing of Urban Development. So if anyone, I don't think most people know to do that, but if you are in fact experiencing bias in terms of housing, that is where you go. You go to you can Google HUD if you're in New York City, and the Human Rights Department of New York State. So I did that, and I found out a year or two later they got back to me. At that point, I had reached out because I wanted to get my apartment back, but they were unable to do that at that point in time, maybe because they have so many people to deal with. And so a year or two goes by, and they reach out to me, and we've been having this back and forth. They'll ask you what happened, and then they will, bring that complaint to who you're filing a complaint against, which in this case was a large national landlord who has a legal team. And the legal team then writes a response to the complaint, which they basically denied everything and said that my complaint was a threat against them and my response. And then they'll ask you for a rebuttal. They asked me for a rebuttal, and in the rebuttal I started off with saying how concerning it was that such a large landlord would take a tenant trying to exercise her basic rights, her basic human rights, to be treated fairly and equally, and why he would take that as a threat of any sort. I spent a week on this rebuttal. It was extremely well written. I didn't want to sound stupid, so I spent a lot of time on it and energy, and in doing that, I had to also do research on Asian hate and the complaints against this landlord, and that just took a lot out of me because I don't like revisiting that. I didn't even like visiting that at the time that this happened. And don't get me wrong, I've been dealing with bias and racism and discrimination my entire life. At some point it became acceptable, part of life. So you almost you get used to it. You get used to accepting it, and then you move on. It's part of life, or so I thought. And this is the first time actually like speaking out against it, and it took a lot out of me. And doing that and revisiting that awful time of Asian hate and all of my past experiences, while also learning about things like implicit bias or microaggressions. And there are all of these things where people could be completely racist and biased and not know it, right? It's subconscious bias. We all have it, except it's apparently more evident in others, or maybe the implicit bias is actually not implicit bias. Maybe it's something that's meant, that's done purposefully. I don't know. I guess it depends on the situation. That's what I'm trying to figure out in my situation. But the point being, I was using all of my time, energy, and resources focusing on fighting racism. And I was trying to see the point of it, and I understand the point of it is standing up for myself, advocating, standing up for others, making sure that no one else goes through this same thing. And that's the reason that I'm doing it, to make sure it never happens again. In doing that, also, I realized that I was just going above and beyond conducting this research and looking up these terms and all of these different court cases and instances of racism, bias, discrimination. And I don't like realizing it. I don't like reading about it. It's just painful for me. It's like I'm reliving it over again. It's extremely frustrating. It makes me angry that this exists in the world, because it really shouldn't. In an ideal world, everything would be fair, but that is not the case. But the thing is, me dwelling on it only made me angrier and more tired. And I think because of that, I had given up my self-care. I was losing sleep. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't doing my morning routine or my evening routine. I wasn't journaling. I wasn't really exercising or spending time with people that I love, or doing my laundry, or really doing anything like washing my face. And it turns me into this like slob, this sluggish, slow, exhausted, spent, tired person, this individual that I hate seeing, that I don't want to be. And I seem like a person that is very on top of it, that takes care of herself, that is a contributing member of society, which I am. And it's really hard to fall into that trap. And I looked in the mirror and I hadn't like combed my hair in a week. I hadn't washed my face in a day or two, brushed my teeth in a day or two. My environment, my house was a mess. I wasn't organizing anything. And because I wasn't eating right, I just was eating junk. And that in turn made me even more depressed. Nutrition and exercise and sunlight and sleep, that all really affects me and my mood, and it affects depression and anxiety and ADHD and anything else you could possibly think of, any health condition, mental or physical. So because those building blocks weren't there, I was ugly. I was getting it. It was like, I think it was Monday, and I was supposed to get ready for a dinner party, and I just realized, I was like, I feel like I am 10 pounds overweight. I am bloated. I like my face, like I just wasn't taking care. I wasn't doing my skin routine. So it just, I feel like I look like I aged 10 years in a week because I was just so stressed out because I was fighting for this, like, my rights, which is important. It's just like it makes you ugly if you continue to do that and if that's the sole thing that you're doing. So I learned a couple things from this. I learned that it's important to distinguish between fighting and advocating for yourself and others, right? Because that comes from a place of like anger and justice, and it's something I'm very passionate about, but it's also, I don't know if I love doing that. I don't know if it exactly gives me joy as much as it is righting a wrong in this world. Right, I feel strongly about it, and it's definitely a trigger, and it's something that I think I'd like to help prevent and right in this world. At the same time, that is not my happy passion. It does not give me joy or happiness. It just prevents pain. So there's a difference between preventing pain and going after and achieving happiness and joy. It's almost like knowing what you don't want, right? But that doesn't necessarily make you happy, because then you're not focusing on what makes you happy. And I think we need to find balance, because if you just keep on focusing on the stuff that's wrong with the world and the things that you don't like, then you're never going to have the energy to do almost the opposite, which is searching out what you love in this world and what gives you joy and what you want to aspire to be. You can't really have one without the other, right? Sometimes it's really helpful to look at the things that you don't want and you don't like about this world. And it's helpful to know that, because it sort of narrows things down a little bit. But then you, at some point, need to just not only do that, but focus on the things that give you joy and happiness. Because what I was doing was I was doing this like human rights thing and fighting for my rights, and sort of ignoring the part where I was discovering what gives me happiness and joy, which is maybe looking more into stand-up comedy, or really anything with humor and comedy, just going to a dinner party with some hilariously funny, loving friends, spending time with my puppy, going on a date, like making my environment pretty, which gives me joy, traveling. I'm currently traveling, actually, but I was spending, instead of like exploring what was around me, I was spending it locked in this space, in this Airbnb, where I just was shut in and focusing on like creating and just writing this rebuttal against this lawyer, so I could make a point, so I could make sure it never happened to me again. And I was righting a wrong and fighting against racism, which is great. Oh God, it's just frustrating even talking about it. And this is a reason why when people talk about achieving happiness and they talk about mental health and depression and burnout and how it all relates, because that affects you finding that joy in the life that you want, and sometimes it's harder for some than others because of privilege and entitlement and the way that the world is. Sometimes it's harder for some of us, especially if you're a woman or a minority, or really any group of people that has been suppressed in some way and that have been discriminated against, or if there's bias of some sort, or really just people suck sometimes. And it's really hurtful. I think it's best to recognize that and have empathy and just take in that gratitude that you are able to empathize and you are able to feel these feelings and realize, all of the wrong in this world, because the other option is just to be ignorant and not fully recognize that. And I don't want that either. So the moral of the story is, fighting racism did make me ugly, because I was spending so much time on it. And I don't want to do that. Some people like doing that, I guess. I don't know who. I mean, civil rights people, but it really does make you angry. So now I am not going to do that so much. I am going to try and like balance it out a little bit more and spend more time focusing on things that gives me joy, which is not necessarily fighting racism. The end.